Welcome to the G5 Hive and our next installment of our Worker Bee series, where we deep dive into the G5 college football landscape with the folks that know the teams the best. If you're watching us on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. And if you're listening to us in podcast form, please rate and review. Today, we'll be heading over to the Sun Belt and taking a look at James Madison Dukes, who finished 9-4 in 2024 and ended their season on a high note, winning the Boca Raton Bowl. They wrapped up their 2025 spring practice with their spring game on April 12th. We have a pair of special guests joining us today. She is a JMU alum and the #1 fan of Devontae Smith's closet and JMU football and baseball reporter for the Daily News Record. She is Catie Harper. Catie can be found on X at Catie Harper. He is a member of the United States Basketball Writers Association and Football Writers Association of America and the co-host of the Purple and Bold and Fun Belt podcast. He covers JMU Daily News Record. He is Shane Mettlen. Shane can be found at Shane_DNR Sports on X. Welcome to the show, Catie and Shane.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
For those just turning into the G5 Hive for the first time, can you tell us a little bit about yourselves and how long you both have been covering JMU football?
Well, I can go first. This is heading into my second full season at the Daily News Record covering JMU football. But as a JMU alum, I started covering them loosely my sophomore year, which was back in 2017, and then covered them full time for the student newspaper in 2018 and 2019. So have some history there. Covered it for several years now and have covered 3 different coaches. So have a little bit of experience with JMU on that one.
Yeah, I started at the Daily News Record in 2018, at first as strictly basketball beat writer, and then as some staff changes happened, added a little more football coverage, especially with the move up to FBS when we started doubling up on football a lot more. So, I've been kind of off and on with football for a while. I was in the area before that too, doing a lot of freelance work. So pretty familiar with JMU going back a little ways.
Well, moving over to the football team, can you guys, for folks that might not be familiar with the Dukes offensive style, how would you describe it?
I think this offense right now it has a lot of talent on it. And I think what we all kind of saw last year was that it was a group that really liked to spread the ball around and make sure multiple different guys were getting involved. And it wasn't just strictly wide receivers. They had a tight end that was very involved in catching passes, and the running back room has been deep for the last couple of years. And it's a group that last year, I think we saw multiple times that, 8, 9 different players were catching a pass, 2, 3 running backs were seeing the field at any given time. And so it's one that likes to move the ball around. And I think at times last year too, we saw that it was a little bit hot and cold. There would be some high points. Looking at that UNC game where they scored 70 points, that's exciting. But then there were also some games where they struggled. And I think we saw kind of a whole range of it. But at its best, it's a really high power offense with a lot of talent. And it's a lot of fun to watch when it's clicking on all cylinders.
Yeah, in terms of style too, it's kind of hard to nail down because you can go back to Chesney's time at Holy Cross too. They've always kind of adapted to their personnel, and they inherited a quarterback last year who was a bit of a dual threat, Alonzo Barnett. I'm sure we'll get into like his injury and stuff here later and what they did in the portal, but they bring in a couple guys, including Matthew Sluka, who was with them at Holy Cross, who's kind of a unique character in college football with the way he runs the ball. So nailing down what their style is going to be, it's almost like too early to say. Like it could be a little bit different than last year.
And Shane, kind of like what you mentioned is this coaching staff going through, I think they were in D3 and different things where maybe you don't get to necessarily pick the players that you want for your team, that kind of getting you, they're able to be a pass heavy team or a run heavy team and really adapt to what the talent that they have there. But let's get into that position where it all starts on offense, and that's the quarterback. Last season we saw Alonzo Barnett, the third, burst onto the scenes for the Dukes, as well as he did return. He did suffer a knee injury in the last game of the season, leaving his status for 2025 up in the air. While the transfer portal giveth to the Dukes in terms of Matt Sluka, like you mentioned, from UNLV, and Cam Coleman from Richmond, it also taketh with Billy Atkins just going into the portal here recently. How did this room look in the spring?
I think throughout the spring, it was an interesting group to watch because there were six quarterbacks on the roster. We were watching 5 of them with Alonzo Barnett not really practicing too much. I think the biggest surprise was seeing him during the last week of spring practices where he actually got out on the field and was able to take some reps. Very limited movement, had the trainer beside him yelling at him if he put too much weight on a leg. And so it was an interesting group to just kind of track and see who's doing what. Billy Atkins entering the portal isn't all that surprising. He was finishing up his degree throughout the spring. So now it's one of those that, looking at the roster and expecting roster limits possibly in the future, it was one that everybody kind of thought he was going to walk out the door once the spring season ended and he graduated. And then now looking at Cam Coleman and Matthew Sluka, it's, at least for me, it was a lot of fun in the spring kind of watching who maybe was going to take the lead in the quarterback race. You obviously have Sluka, who knows the coaching staff really well, had his best years under the coaching staff. And then you have Cam Coleman, who transfers in, is new to the staff, but they also go out and get 2 of his wide receivers that he was really, really good with and had a great connection with last year. So it was fun to watch. And I think they're very similar size, but then have completely different stances when they drop back. So it's so interesting to see kind of who brings what. And Cam Coleman is a little bit more of the passer and complete quarterback in that sense. But as Shane mentioned earlier, it's kind of hard to deny Matthew Sluka once he starts running.
Yeah, and it's a conversation Catie and I have had, like, both between ourselves and on our podcast and everywhere else, is just, if the roster limit does go to 105, like, there was no way they could continue to keep 6 quarterbacks on the roster. So yeah, the Billy Atkins transfer really was not a surprise at all. He's a guy who probably can go start somewhere, whether it's at the FCS level or the Group of 5 level. And, but probably didn't have that opportunity at JMU with the guys returning and those 2 transfers.
So we talked about Alonzo's injury. How's that recovery going, and what do you anticipate for his status being for the 2025 season?
We haven't really had the chance to talk to Alonzo since he went down with the injury. We've talked quite a bit with Bob Chesney about him because heading into the spring, Bob Chesney's biggest worry was making sure that the mental side of it wasn't going to take a toll on Barnett once practices started up and he wasn't able to get out on the field with his teammates. And throughout it all, Bob Chesney has been extremely complimentary of him and saying that he's really put his head down and focused and made sure he's taking care of himself and doing the steps that are needed to get better. And I mean, Shane may agree with this as well, but like having our conversations that we had with Alonzo Barnett last year, talking to him about the struggles he went through his sophomore season when he was named a starter and then pulled in the first game. He's a very level-headed person who doesn't get too high or too low. And I think that's been really impressive to see out of someone who's still on the relatively young side of college football. And I think he's been handling it well. And it will be interesting to see come, later into the summer, how much he's progressed from what we saw at the end of the spring, where it was just very limited in his movement and what he was allowed to do.
Yeah. I mean, to kind of, just follow up on that, it's like Catie said, we don't have a ton of like actual confirmed details about the injury, the timeline, anything else. But I think everyone was a little bit surprised to see him actually on the field this spring, which, may or may not mean he's a little bit ahead of schedule. Hard to say, but I can think that was a pleasant surprise for everybody, even if it wasn't really much activity, definitely no contact, anything like that. Just to see him in uniform was probably a good sign.
And I wanted to add on that too. Well, I had asked Bob Chesney too the day that he practiced. I was like, hey, was this spring even in the consideration for him? Like, was he supposed to be out here practicing at all? And Bob Chesney was like, yeah, no, probably not. Like, we weren't expecting this at this point of his recovery.
So assuming Alonzo isn't ready or available for the majority of the season, who do you think leads this Dukes offense in 2025?
I lean Matthew Sluka with the history and his age. That said, I think Cam Coleman is a very, very good quarterback who has proven himself as a starter at the FCS level. The coaching staff does have some room to work with because he still has his red shirt available. But I've kind of made jokes at times that in my like crazy football fan world, I would love to see JMU throw 3 quarterbacks out on the field at once between Cam Coleman, Matthew Sluka, and then JC Evans, because they have that option of 2 running quarterbacks. I don't know if that will ever happen, but I think I'll lean Sluka and I'll see where it goes from there, because I would say the only concern with him can be his completion percentage.
And Catie, I'll start with you since you said Sluka. Can you describe his style to people who are not familiar with Sluka? And then Shane, I'll come over to you and ask about Coleman.
I think Matthew Sluka he's really fun to watch. And we didn't get to see him during the spring. We didn't get to see him run too many drives until we got to the spring game. And he is one that he wants to make contact with players. He will run through someone if he has to. And obviously with the spring game, it's non-contact. And I had told Shane a few weeks ago, one of my favorite things was there were a few times where, the refs blow a play dead because they assume it's going to be a sack. And you could just tell that Sluka did not agree with it because his brain is so wired to live game action, where he was like, I would have just run through that guy and kept going. So I think his competitiveness there is really impressive to see. Running quarterbacks, I think, can always get some fans engaged with how much fun they are. And I think for him, his biggest X factor is that ability to just kind of lower his shoulder and run through a guy and make the difference with his legs while still being able to pass it around a little bit. But like I said, it's his completion percentage at times can be a little bit rocky.
And Shane, do you want to talk about Cam Coleman and his skill set?
Yeah, I mean, to kind of bring Sluka back into it, though, like, we didn't necessarily see what he can do in the spring game because it was basically touch football for the quarterbacks, and that's just not, going to show off his skill set. But if you watched the spring game without knowing anything about any of those guys, you probably would have tagged Coleman as the starter because, his ability to throw the ball in that setting, he just kind of looked like the best quarterback. Now, I don't know if that's fair to say because of the spring game's limitations, but he's just more of a traditional type quarterback, I think, as a guy who's going to throw the ball. Not that he can't run, but if he's the starter, it'll be a different looking kind of offense probably than what they have with Sluka, who moves it more with his feet, even in what you would consider passing down situations. He was able to do that at Holy Cross and UNLV. Coleman, I think, will look maybe more similar to what Alonzo Barnett gave them last year.
Camden Coleman also has the physical aspect. I mean, we saw him in the spring game. Running back went left at first and then cut back right. And when Cam Coleman realized that the running back was heading back in his direction, he turned around and laid probably the best block I've ever seen a quarterback lay on one of the cornerbacks for JMU. So it was one of those that, yes, it's a non-contact spring game, but he wasn't afraid to lower the shoulder and kind of make that physical presence.
Yeah.
Moving over to the
mention that block. That was one of the highlights of the entire spring game.
Definitely.
Moving over to the running game, this room is highlighted by the return of leading rusher George Pettaway and his 981 yards on the ground. They also return Wayne Knight, at least for the moment, and Ayo Adeyi, who missed the majority of the 2024 season due to injury. How did this room look in the spring?
So fun. We kept asking Bob Chesney, Dean Kennedy, the offensive coordinator, like, what do you do when you have so many running backs who can make a difference? I mean, you even have Joby Mallory, who didn't have a ton of carries earlier on in the season, but as injuries stacked up, he was a little bit more of a presence. This group is going to be so complete if everyone stays healthy, stays through the transfer portal closing here in a few days. And it's looking at what George Pettaway was able to grow into last season after Ayo Adeyi was injured should be really, really promising to some JMU fans, because he was so close to eclipsing that 1,000-yard mark. And it's one that if an Ayo Adeyi and a Wayne Knight stay healthy throughout the season, I don't know if he necessarily reaches 1,000 yards again this year, just because of how much they like to spread it around. But it's a fun group to watch that's very, very talented.
Yeah, it's just a proven group too. I don't know. I'd have to check, but I'm not sure how many teams around the Sun Belt, even the G5, that have 2 900-yard rushers on their roster. We talk so much about the quarterbacks, but they could really maybe try to control the tempo of the game and the time of possession with their running back room if things go well and they all stay healthy.
How is IO's recovery going, and what do you anticipate his status being heading into 2025?
I talked with him, I believe, the first week of spring football, and he said it's probably the best he's felt in a really long time, and he feels more explosive, and he feels like he can make his cuts a little bit better than he could last year because for the listeners, he talked about it. It was a toe injury, and it was one that knocked him out. He never missed a whole season like that, and so he's feeling better now. So I expect him to kind of hit the ground running once fall camp starts as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of those ones during the season too where I think for a while we wondered if he would be back last season, and then it probably just ended up being a situation where it didn't make sense to bring him back, especially with Petaway's performance and Wayne Knight and other guys. But yeah, it wasn't necessarily like Barnett where we went in not thinking we wouldn't see him in the spring or anything.
Well, given all that talent, how do you expect the workload to kind of be, divided up, so to speak?
I think it will be a pretty even split at times. I think George Petaway and Wayne Knight also both showed their ability to be productive in the passing game as well. That's not to say that Adai can't do it as well. We just saw such a small sample size from him at the last season, and a lot of it too was not necessarily his best. And we were never told 100% if that was injury related or if it was him adjusting to being at JMU for the first time. But I would expect it to still be a pretty spread out group, kind of like the wide receivers. And I think you would see someone like a George Petaway and a Wayne Knight really being options in the pass game as well.
Yeah, I don't have a whole lot to add to that. Pretty much covered, how I think could probably see them used. I mean, she mentioned Joby Mallory before. He kind of became a fan favorite a little bit. You're being a bigger back, potential short yardage guy. I don't know if we'll see a little bit more of him in those situations than we did last year or not, but it's a pretty crowded room.
If you had to pick one guy, maybe between the big three, so to speak, is there one guy that looks kind of like the goal line back, if you will, or the short yardage guy between those three? Or
short yardage, I would actually go Joby Mallory would probably be the one they would bring in. He's kind of just like a tank, and he runs over people right up the middle. So that's probably goal line. I would lean him, but I also think that any of them would be very confident walking up to Dean Kennedy and asking for the ball.
Who do you expect to get that first carry against Weber State?
I'll go George Petaway. I actually looked before this to double check who had the first carry against Charlotte last year, and it was Adai. I think they reward Petaway for the season he put together, and that's really the only reason I would say it's him who gets the first carry, because I wouldn't be shocked by any of them getting it.
Yeah, I mean, they could even, depending on the formation they come out in, it could be a different guy. I mean, the depth chart will be out there, but sometimes the number ones aren't all on the field when they come out there for the first play.
Yeah, we learned that quickly last year. Bob Chesney's depth charts, too deep. Just don't take them with a grain of salt. They're not always the most accurate.
Well, let's move over to the wide receiver room, and they lose their top three receivers in Ymir Knight to the portal and Cameron Ross to Virginia. And then Omarion Dollison graduated. They also returned Dylan Williams and bring in Zeron Collins and Nick DeGenaro from Richmond and Landon Ellis from Richmond. They also bring in Jalen Sanchez from Villanova from the portal. How did this group look in the spring?
A lot of fun. I watched Jalen Sanchez practically run over a linebacker at one point. So that one was fun to watch him. Again, not a big guy necessarily, just kind of lower his shoulder and just go right through him. So That was a lot of fun. Nick DeGennaro was a little injured throughout the spring, so we didn't see him a ton. Didn't really see him in the spring game either. Dylan Williams was someone, or he is someone I think is continuing to grow into a bigger role. He kind of had a breakout in the spring of 2024 when he enrolled early. And from then it was kind of a question of like, okay, are they going to use him all the time, or are they going to just try and put him in 4 games, give him the red shirt? They end up using him throughout the season, so he doesn't redshirt. And he's someone now, seeing where some of these guys have left, I think he's someone that's really going to step up. But it's a group that, you know, Shane and I have talked about it, even with Ymir Knight leaving, who was their leading receiver a year ago. It's not necessarily a concern that he left, because they have so much depth coming in who came in December, and they're still out there right now. And I wouldn't be shocked if they add a couple more wide receivers this portal.
Yeah, we actually talked about it earlier today. Like nobody wanted to see Ymir Knight go, but then at the same time, they very quickly replaced him with a Maryland transfer. I think Braden Wisłowski. I think I got that not right, but very similar skill set. So, you know, like I said, nobody was excited to see him go, but it's interesting just how much they kind of reloaded in that particular position group. Even listening to some guys from last year that, you know, frankly, drops were a problem at times for that wide receiver group. And, you know, we'll see if maybe there's some better hands on the field this time around.
I was going to say the one transfer that he made his presence known on social media before spring practice even started was the Richmond transfer, Nick DeGennaro. I think he had like one drop throughout his career at Richmond or something. And he responded to someone, he was like, that one drop is even questionable, saying that I think he said it should have been a flag or something. So he's one that you should expect the ball to kind of just stick to his hand when it comes his way.
And you mentioned a couple of those Richmond transfers and Ellison DeGennaro. Who do you anticipate stepping up to lead this wide receiver room?
I would say, I think you could see DeGennaro leading it, or potentially Jalen Sanchez, just with their age and experience. Even coming from the FCS, they've both proven themselves to be really top level receivers, and they're older. So I would say that's the way I lean right now. Those are 2 guys that are really going to step up and kind of be the leaders of that group.
Yeah, wouldn't argue with that. I mean, you maybe would have leaned a little bit more towards Ymir Knight, like before he left, just being a guy who came back. But yeah, I wouldn't argue with either one of those choices. Just like she said, the experience level's there for those.
All right,
guys.
you guys are the coach. All right, you guys were the coach. If you had to pick 3 wide receivers for the week 1 lineup, who are you throwing out there?
My realistic 3 would be DeGennaro, Sanchez, and probably Dylan Williams. But in a craziness world, since it's Weber State, you may change it up a little bit and see what you have. They have a true freshman, Mikey Scott, who really impressed at the spring game and is just kind of a 5'9" speed demon. So I'm not going to lie, I would also love to see him out of the slot just for one play to start the game too.
Yeah, I wouldn't argue with the 3 she mentioned first at all. Seems like a pretty likely combination. But yeah, I don't know that I would expect Mikey Scott to be out there like first play, but he's a true freshman that people got pretty excited about this spring.
I just think it'd be so fun.
All right, if you were to describe how the tight ends are utilized in this offense to someone who's never caught a Dukes game, how would you describe it?
This is a great question for the history of JMU. It died off a little bit under Kurt Signetti, and it came back last year. JMU has a history of running tight end pop passes a lot. When they won the national championship at the FCS level in 2016, it was like every other play, it seemed like, was a pop pass to a tight end. And it came out against App State. So they have some tight ends who can really make a name for themselves in the receiving game. The biggest issue is going to be that the one that did it the most last year, Taylor Thompson, is now graduated and left the program. And Piper and Logan Kyle both had some issues, as we mentioned earlier, with drops. They were 2 that at times just couldn't bring the ball in. But if they can kind of lock in on that, it's a group that definitely can be like the 8th or 9th guy that catches a pass in a game.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of talk about how they're used interesting, I'll throw out that when they decided to go for 2 early in the game, which they did a lot last year, it seemed like there was always a tight end involved in something tricky. So just throw that out there too.
Did anything stand out to they brought in a transfer from Charlotte, right? Dupree, did he stand out at all to you guys?
I would kind of expect Dupree, with his history of also playing on the defensive side of the ball, I would actually see him kind of slotting in as a tight end who is similar to Kai Wright, who also graduated last year or after last season, who also caught a tight end pop pass in the bowl game. But he was used almost specifically as a blocking tight end. And so that's kind of where I would expect Dupree to slot in as well, just with his history of kind of working with linemen and stuff like that.
Offensive line could be a concern here in 2025 as the Dukes only returned 2 starters from a year ago in all-conference right tackle Pat Mercatire and left guard Carter Sweezy. In an effort to help the depth in this room, they brought in Zach Greenberg from North Carolina and Cam McNair from Holy Cross. How did this offensive line look in the spring?
To me, I would actually kind of go on the side that it's not too big of a concern. I think this year you're going to see the benefit that JMU had last year, where their offensive line coach, Chris Smith, loves rotating guys in and out. Injuries did start to stack up for them a little bit last year, but there are other guys like a Josh Toner and a Riley Robel who really, really played well. And Riley Robel is actually one that I would expect to maybe garner some all-conference honors and be in that conversation. He got hurt kind of in the midpoint of the season, but he's one that I would expect to be starting somewhere on that offensive line. But again, like, they will put anybody anywhere pretty much. And obviously with Pat McMurtry, that's one that is going to be about as steady as you can ask for on an offensive lineman heading into his 7th year of college football. But I would say it's actually probably a group that I think should be pretty consistent and pretty reliable throughout.
Yeah, I think if they stay healthy, that's the key, that they could have some depth. And like she said, they move guys around a lot. If you're trying to put together like a, probable depth chart, it's almost hard you almost kind of got to guess like whether a guy's a tackle or a guard at this point. It could be either way, which was not something we really saw at all under Kurt Cignetti. Like, he didn't move them around as much other than maybe at center, like, a guy could be a backup center while they're starting somewhere else. But yeah, I think if they're healthy, that the offensive line should be, potentially even improved a little bit. There were some weak links last year, like, honestly, and they're gone at this point.
I think McMurtry also has the honor of being the only first team all Sun Belt returning to the Sun Belt in 2025.
He is.
Yeah. He may never leave college.
If you had to pick an offensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who would that be?
I would probably go Dylan Williams. I think he's the one that, with what we've seen out of him in the spring of 2024, heading into his true freshman year, now that some of the guys in the wide receiver room ahead of him are gone, I think he's someone that could really, really make an impact for JMU's offense. Yeah,
that's a good pick. He's the guy after last year's spring game as a true freshman. Everybody was kind of like, wow, this guy's going to be good. And then he didn't get a ton of targets. I don't know if it counts as a breakout, but it can maybe throw Sluka in there. Just if they run the kind of offense that they did at Holy Cross with him, he may put up some video game type numbers, especially running the ball that, you don't see quarterbacks do very often.
Yeah, I also was leaning Jalen Sanchez too, but similar to what Shane said, like, I don't know if it really counts as a breakout for him since he's been at the college level. I guess it could be an FBS breakout for him, but he's another one, him and Dylan Williams, I would say, are probably two that I'm really keeping an eye on.
Well, let's move over to the defensive side of the ball, where the Dukes will be getting a new defensive coordinator in Colin Hitchler. How would you describe Coach Hitchler's defensive style and the Duke scheme going into 2025?
From what we've gathered talking to the guys, it's still pretty similar to what they were running under Lyle Hemphill last year. It's, in their own words, it's a little bit more simplified back to We've talked with Trent Hendrick, who's a linebacker. It's a little more simplified back to what they were running under Bryant Haynes in his years with Kurt Cignetti leading the defense. So Shane and I had talked about it too. I would say that it's one that you would probably expect them to play somewhere around a 4-2-5 in that variation of it. They have a lot of nickels on their roster. One of their best defensive players last year was a nickel and DJ Barksdale. So it's one that you're probably going to be set on your 4 guys up front. And then once you get past there, it could be a mixing and matching of what they throw out there.
Well, let's start with the guys up front along the defensive line. This group takes a big hit, losing 28 sacks as Eric O'Neal goes off to Rutgers, Kari Mans graduates, and Lloyd Summerall graduates on the edge. In the interior, they lose Chris Fitzgerald to graduation and Daryl Dengohe to Rutgers. This group features a returner and Emmanuel Bush on the interior who had 3 sacks a year ago. It's probably the highlight of that defensive line as far as what's returning. They also added through the portal the likes of Kels Bush from Louisiana Tech and Xavier Holmes from Maine. How did that unit look in the spring?
Well, in the spring game, I think everybody, well, not even just the spring game, everybody at spring practice, one of our favorite players media-wise is Emmanuel Bush. He is this massive human being. This spring, he showed up to practice and he's wearing number 0 as a defensive tackle. Is a character on the field, and he's definitely one that I think everybody has some high hopes. And he's one that if he has a good season, he's someone that could potentially have that NFL kind of prospect and kind of turn into that. So this group it's interesting. And, no one knew what JMU had last year in Eric O'Neal, and he ends up having a breakout year. And so with guys like Xavier Holmes coming in, I think it's still a group that could really end up being well, and some other guys that they've brought in too. I think it's an interesting group to follow, but I'm not expecting them to necessarily take a step back and regress.
Yeah, they seem to always find pass rushers. I mean, 2 years ago, the defensive line was one of the most loaded groups I've ever seen, and we're talking any level because a lot of these guys went to Richmond and played to Indiana and played in the college football playoff this year. That group was so loaded, you thought they were going to take a huge step back, and then they find guys who could get to the quarterback last year. So you got to hope history repeats itself a little bit with that when you lose Eric O'Neal and some of those guys, but they have a track record of doing it.
Did anyone kind of stand out in the spring as like that next, great edge rusher for the Dukes, or?
It's hard in the spring too, just because of the contact with the quarterback. I would say, actually, the person I feel like got after the quarterback the most in the spring game is Sahir West, who is young and really talked heavily after the spring game about being able to learn from Kari Mans and from Eric O'Neal. And he's someone that has kind of a cult following right now with JMU fans. They really like Sahir West. And I think he's someone that could really grow into a good role. I think Xavier Holmes has a proven track record of being able to get after the quarterback. And outside of Sahir West, the spring game, Trent Hendrick from the linebacker position was getting after the quarterback and being credited with sacks as well.
In order for this room to be successful in 2025, who do you feel needs to step up the most?
I'd probably go Sahir West. I think you need a young guy to step up in that one.
I'll throw out Emmanuel Bush. Not that he hasn't played well in the past, but it's kind of, fallen on him a little bit to be the experienced leader and, maybe step up. I don't know his numbers ever be huge playing on the interior the way he does, but, he has a chance to have a really good year.
Well, the linebacking group takes a hit, losing their second leading tackler in Jacob Dobbs, and the experience of Taurus Jones and Raymond Scott. They do return Trent Hendricks and Gannon Weatherby, and bring in JT Kwame Yao from Shepherd. How did this group look this spring?
This is probably, when you look at the whole roster, and Shane and I have talked about this on our podcast, the biggest kind of question mark right now, or maybe weaker spots. There's not a ton of weak spots on this team. I would say is maybe linebacker, just because if you are JMU and you get into the season and something happens and Trent Hendrick has an injury, you're taking a massive loss. He's pretty much right now the only linebacker in that room that has heavy starting experience at the Division I level. And we've seen it so far in the spring portal where they are offering quite a bit of Division I linebackers. And I think they need to bring a guy or two in to really help kind of set that defense. And I think Trent Hendrick is going to be the leader of that group. And I think he's going to be the one kind of quarterbacking it all, but he needs some support beside him, and they need to get some depth in that room that has experience as a starter.
Yeah, I think Trent Hendrick has a chance to have a really good year, and he's one of those guys almost that like seems like he's been around forever, and you're like, oh god, he's still here because guys move around so much. But I think they probably are going to have to go try to find a starter in the portal here this spring. So, we'll see who they end up bringing in to boost the depth a little bit.
Moving over to the defensive backfield, they'll look a little bit different in 2025. They lose all-conference performer and Jim Thorpe Awards semifinalist and cornerback Terrence Spence, as well as cornerback Jordan Taylor, Chauncey Logan, safeties Chris Sharon, and Ray Williams. They do return the leading tackler from a year ago and safety Jacob Thomas and cornerback Justin Eglin. They also bring us some help via the portal and cornerbacks Chance Harley from Maryland, Mekhi Rogers from St. Francis, as well as safeties Curtis Harris-Lopez from Holy Cross and TJ McGill from William & Mary. What should we expect in this defensive backfield in 2025?
Similar to the linebacker group, they are lucky to have a Jacob Thomas right now who is entering his 4th season with the program, and he is very much a leader in that secondary and does a good job of it. He was a leader in it last year as a junior. When it comes to the cornerbacks, like you mentioned, they've lost several guys, but Coach Chesney was very high on Mekhi Rogers out of St. Francis through the spring. He's someone, after talking to him a couple times now, he's very driven to kind of make his mark known. Had a little bit of a rough recruiting period coming out of high school just with COVID. So he's someone that I wouldn't be too shocked if he ends up kind of being a hidden gem that they found out of nowhere, similar to Eric O'Neill last year. And then with Chance Harley, I'm really excited to see him step on the field at the cornerback position. He was always kind of fun to watch at spring practice. In his preparation, he was so locked in before practice. He likes to juggle, and he was doing that on the sidelines before practice even got started and just kind of getting into that mentality. So he's one that I think could really be a difference maker out wide as well.
I was just going to say I pretty much agreed with that that take. It's kind of, wait and see, but they have done such a good job. And this goes back a couple of coaching staffs, finding those guys from FCS programs who end up being studs at this level. So, we'll see if that repeats itself in the defensive backfield.
Who do you feel needs to step up in order for this room to be successful in 2025?
I would actually, after talking with him, I think a transfer that could I would like to see kind of step up is Curtis Harris-Lopez out of Holy Cross. After having a conversation with him back when he committed, very much came off as a Bob Chesney guy with the way he talked and approached the game. And I think having him beside Jacob Thomas could be really, really helpful. I think last year's maybe unsung hero on the defense was Chris Sharon at safety, and he's now graduated and out of eligibility. So I think they need someone to slot in beside Jacob Thomas and kind of help him run that secondary a little bit, because like I said, he's good at it, but sometimes you can have the vocal leader and then have someone who's kind of just going to be there and lead with his play as well.
Is there any concerns about the depth in this room?
Honestly, not right now. Kind of similar to the wide receivers. JMU loves offering cornerbacks right now, and so they lost Chauncey Logan. I wouldn't be shocked if another corner or two comes in. So to me, it's not necessarily a concern at this moment. As well as looking at last year, they actually, not to say makes it certain it's going to happen again, they stayed relatively healthy at cornerback last year, and maybe not completely healthy, but guys were still able to play.
If you had to pick a defensive player to have a breakout type season in 2025, who are you picking? Catie will go first, and then we'll come over to you, Shane.
I will go. It's weird. Okay, he won't have a breakout performance to JMU fans because I think he's already done that for them. I think at a Sunbelt and maybe a more national level, I'd go Trent Hendrick. He hasn't necessarily gotten his conference honors the way some guys have. I think last year we all saw in the Sunbelt, it was a very talented linebacker group. And now that some of them have graduated, I would say that Trent Hendrick will maybe have a more breakout year on a national scale.
Yeah, I was going to say maybe Gannon Weathersby, guy who showed some flashes. He's still young. So maybe this isn't quite his breakout year, but depending on what they do end up adding in the portal, he may be on the field a lot, and he has some potential, and also cool with the face paint and everything. So if he does make some plays, he's probably going to get a lot of TV time with it too.
I think that's telling. Both of you picking linebackers, so you're really liking this linebacker room, and going to be the face of JMU's defense.
Oh, I make jokes in the press box all the time. I am a linebacker first person, the best position on the field.
Well, moving over to the special teams unit, you have the recent departure of kicker Noah Relis to the transfer portal. So it seemed that maybe kicking is going to be a concern. But how did the special teams units look, and what are the concerns?
After the spring game, I would actually say that my biggest concern is still probably punting. JMU, obviously, the last couple of years benefited from having a 5-time Ray Guy Award watch list member in Ryan Hansen. And Lexington Matthews comes in from the Division II level, has shown at times that he has a really, really strong leg, but in the spring game didn't necessarily have his best performances, had some off punts that didn't go far at all. So I would say that is probably the bigger concern I have when it comes to kicking. And Shane and I had talked about this earlier too, is Cristiano Rosa has range. He hit a 51-yarder to match Noe Ruelas in the spring game as well. I think JMU's biggest thing right now is if they're going to let Cristiano Rosa do kickoffs and field goals, are they going to limit him to just one? Because he was really good at kickoffs last year, because they also have a young guy in Max Saplinski that they can work in. And he had a few reps last year when Ruelas was hurt. But Cristiano Rosa, I think, has shown that he can be a kicker, a reliable one. It's just how much do they want him doing kind of all of it?
All right. Well, now that the spring practice is over, which position group or groups do you think is the most concerning heading into 2025? Shane, we'll start off with you.
It's interesting because we both picked linebackers for kind of our breakout players, but I think maybe that's most concerning just because of depth. They could really add some bodies there because, it is a place where injuries have gotten them the past couple of years too. So, I'd put that as pretty high on the concern list, really just kind of adding depth to the room.
Yeah, linebacker would probably still be the one that should be the most concerning, not even in a bad way, because again, they have really talented linebackers. Just like Shane said, if they get hurt, I would also say it becomes a concern on the opposite side of the ball if the wide receivers have the same drop issue that they did last year. But if this new group can catch the ball consistently well, I would say that, yeah, the biggest concern right now is more so the linebackers than wide receivers.
And how do you think they're going to address those concerns? Are they going to go to the portal? You think we got a couple days left while that's open, or is it going to be just more rotating and getting guys more experience?
At least at linebacker, it definitely seems to be the portal. They've put quite a few offers out on the table to some linebackers. Some of them have already committed, but they have gotten some to campus for visits over the last couple of days. So I wouldn't be shocked if one commits in the next few days. Linebacker, like they said, and then wide receivers, they are still offering wide receivers galore in the portal right now. So I think in an ideal world, on Team Kennedy's mind, and Justin Harper, who's the wide receiver coach, I think they would gladly take like 60 wide receivers for the team.
In today's age of NIL, revenue sharing, and the transfer portal, how has it changed JMU's recruiting philosophy?
Well, after talking to Bob Chesney last year, he said, I want to say we had a media day right before the season started during fall camp, and he was asked about NIL, and he made it clear that if one of the first questions out of a recruit's mouth is how much money he's going to get, at that point, Chesney and his staff kind of are like, you know what, this isn't the kind of guy that we want on our team. Like, we're going to move elsewhere. So I think it's impacted it there because they are being very mindful of who they are bringing in, and they want to make sure that they're guys that are coming to the school to compete and not necessarily just get the paycheck.
Yeah, it's been interesting because we really don't know how much money JMU is working with compared to other programs. It seems like they're competitive when it comes to NIL. They're going to participate in revenue sharing, but it's all a lot of question marks at this point. And yeah, you got to, if you're a program like JMU, any of the group of 5 programs, with a few exceptions, you kind of got to find the guys who are looking for playing time, looking for a few other things, and the money's also a nice bonus. That's kind of got to be the recruiting philosophy. You're not going to outbid people for a $4 million quarterback. It just doesn't happen here.
You talked about the revenue sharing, and one thing that JMU did, I guess, was earlier in the year when they kind of folded the collective and kind of moved that over to the school for revenue sharing. What can you guys share about that decision?
I think it was really just with the rules allowing things to move in-house, that the money can come straight from the school. It doesn't have to, it was always kind of a little bit silly that it was like pretending like the coaches weren't involved or anything, and it had to go through the collective. So, it was really just kind of a matter of folding it into the existing structure, the Duke Club, and making it easier for people to know where they're going to donate their money. Like it was awkward always, for a lot of schools, JMU included, to be saying, well, please donate to this and this funds scholarships, this funds NIL. Like, it makes it a lot easier on everybody when it's all one place.
But does it make it harder in the sense of the NIL is kind of this no cap, salary cap type thing, and then within the school, then it's like, well, if the House passes and we have these revenue sharings, we can only spend X amount of dollars, and then if anything else of the Title IX conversation is, well, that applies to the school, so then that would apply to then that kind of revenue sharing and everything that's in-house, as opposed to a separate identity that's outside that doesn't necessarily have to follow those rules.
Yeah, I mean, I think it becomes more those donations become part of the revenue sharing, like, rather than being NIL like we've called it. NIL at a place like JMU will probably turn more into, this kid's really popular, he can do some stuff on social media on his own, or he can have a sponsorship deal with a local business or things like that. Like, rather than, and that'll be done more on their own or through their agents or other things, rather than the school setting it up as much, is at least my interpretation of it.
How do you feel that the staff there at James Madison is doing navigating the portal? You talked about kind of evaluating the kids, and if money's the first kind of conversation that they start with, like, okay, this isn't the kind of personality we want in the locker room. How are they going navigating that portal?
I would say it's been very impressive to see. I think this coaching staff, I know we've talked about him earlier now as a departure, but Eric O'Neill was at Long Island for several seasons, and wasn't really garnering much attention at the FBS level, but JMU was able to locate him out of the portal and be like, you know what, this is a kid that has some talent that can come in and really step up for us. So I think they've done a good job of maybe not going out and getting the flashiest guy in the portal that maybe was at a Power 4 program, but is looking for more playing time at the G5. They're going out and finding guys that at the FCS level that can really step up and perform. So I think they've done a really good job analyzing the portal and seeing kind of who fits their scheme the best.
All right, Catie and Shane, we talked about the most concerning groups, but what do you think the biggest strength is of the Dukes team in 2025?
If everyone stays healthy, running backs. I think that is a group that, like we talked about earlier, they have proven themselves time and time again to be could be number one guys, honestly, at a school. And so I think that's probably where they have the most talent, especially with an offensive line that still has some guys that can help create the holes and gaps for them to get through. I think that's going to be the position group that's going to be a lot of fun to watch this season.
Yeah, I will kind of just say the offense as a whole. I feel like it's potentially more talented, more depth on offense than last year. Where, as Catie mentioned before, it was hit or miss. They had some really, really outstanding games, and then some games where they really struggled to move the ball, put points on the board. If they stay healthy, I feel like it has a chance to be a pretty consistently explosive offense, just with the number of actual weapons they have compared to last year.
What does success look like for the Dukes in 2025?
I would say right now, with looking at what this roster is, for this team to say that they're successful, I think it needs to end with the Sun Belt Championship and being in the conversation as the G5 representative in the college football playoff.
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of also that's kind of become the fan base expectation too. Is that, you know, they weren't eligible to play for the conference championship those first 2 years in FBS, but they finished first in their division. They had really good teams, and so somehow 9 wins last year becomes a little bit of a disappointment, like just because they weren't at the top of the East. And fans are going to want to see that. And like I said, I feel like maybe there's more talent this year, but a tougher schedule. So it's interesting. I think they have the ability to maybe win 10 or 11 games, but it's going to be against a more difficult schedule than they had last year. So even if they're better, the record may be similar.
Well, Catie and Shane, we've covered a lot of ground today, but is there anything else you want to share or think we should know about this 2025 James Madison Dukes football team?
Oh, wow. I think they're going to be a fun group to watch. Like Shane said, the offense should be a lot of fun to watch. And they're also a good group to watch kind of out in the community too. And I think JMU fans have realized that as well under Bob Chesney, that they've brought in some good players that are at times for fans fun to cheer for.
Yeah, similar. I think it'll be fun because, you know, they play a pretty interesting non-conference schedule. I think one of the probably the most fun group of 5 games, you know, interconference this year is going to be JMU versus Liberty. Kind of the last few years, it's been the best rivalry that hasn't been played, kind of because those fan bases don't get along very well, and the in-state aspect of it. So I think seeing how they end up doing in a non-conference will be really fun to watch.
Well, Catie, Shane, thank you so much for taking time out of your days to spend with us and share your knowledge. We greatly appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that like and subscribe button. If you're listening in podcast form, please rate and review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Thank you all for your support. And until the next time, we are the G5 Hive.